The inbuilt multitasking in portrait mode is almost useless for watching video and taking notes at the same time. A better way would be to use multitasking in landscape, where the video is on one side and note-taking app is on the other. But what if you could have a video on top and a note-taking app like Goodnotes on the bottom? This video is all about that. Let's get started. In a nutshell, we will rotate YouTube in Safari and pages in a note-taking app to achieve the final result. There is a reason why I showed Goodnotes in the intro, because it's just so easy to rotate pages in it. As far as I know, it's not the same with most other note-taking apps. For example, in Notability, you can change the aspect ratio or orientation, which will change for all the pages, and then write everything you want to write in the notes in that aspect ratio. Once you're done, you can save the notes in your iPad. And then rotate the pages using some external PDF editor and import back to Notability. Here I'm just using an online tool to rotate, and then I'm importing back the notes into Notability. You can find similar workarounds for other apps as well. I really wouldn't consider it as working, but if that is enough, then sure. I'm good with Goodnotes as it's just more convenient to rotate, and it's one of the best note-taking apps anyway. That was the easy part. Now buckle up, the ride is going to get really wild. We need to understand how web pages work before trying to rotate them. A web page that you see generally has 3 files residing in your browser related to it: HTML, CSS and JS. Roughly speaking, HTML tells the browser what to render. For example, we have a few video section and text sections as highlighted there. CSS tells the browser where or how to place the HTML elements, making pages more organized, colorful, etc. These are some examples of with CSS on the left and without CSS on the right of the same page. JS makes the web page dynamic, meaning it interacts with the user and performs actions based on the input and much more. For example, JS can talk to the remote servers to fetch data. If you want a video in YouTube, when you search for something, JS takes that search and asks the YouTube servers to get the related information. Also, if you want to make all the elements change their color for some reason, JS can in turn ask CSS to do that. JS does many more things, which is not the scope of this video. Basically, JS is responsible for all the dynamic behavior of the web page, and I am going to leave it at that. Coming to the part that is essential for us, let's see how HTML looks like with a small example. On the left we have the UI, and on the right is a simplified version of its HTML, where each line corresponds to a UI element as shown. HTML elements start with the tag names, which tells the browser what to render. Do keep an eye on what's being highlighted in the code in order to follow what I'm saying. This h1 tag is corresponding to the header, img for image, and so on. Also, some of them have a closing tag or an end tag, and some don't. But let's not get into those details now. Each HTML element can have what we call as attributes. These attributes have different functions depending on the HTML element. For example, Extasy stands for source, which tells the HTML which image to render. Apart from that, we can have contents inside the HTML for some of the elements, and tag name along with attributes is considered as a start tag. You don't have to remember all of this, but if I use any of these terms in the video and you are unable to follow, you can always come back here and understand what I'm speaking. That's roughly how a HTML element is. For our purpose, the attributes we are concerned with are class and ID. Think of class and IDs as some sort of identifiers. Identifiers using which CSS and JS can refer to that particular element. A HTML element can have many classes, and many HTML elements can have the same class, but there can be only one ID for a HTML element. Also, both of these are not mandatory. As you can see, using a class name or ID, all the elements having that particular class or ID are collected. Any changes specified to the classes or IDs will be applied to all the elements which are collected. You will understand this better in the following examples, so don't worry if that didn't make much sense. Along with classes and IDs, HTML tag names can also be used like that. Couple of points to note before looking at CSS. First, note the syntactic difference in accessing HTML elements using tags, IDs and classes. If there is nothing in front, CSS or JS searches for tags with that name. If there is a hashtag, they search for HTML elements whose ID matches that name, and similarly a dot before class name. Other point to note is, in this simple example, there are elements one after the other. There can also be elements one inside the other, like here, in which the text is inside the div element with class small blue box, which is in turn inside a div element with class big blue box. You can think this as some sort of hierarchy. On the UI, inner elements are rendered on the top. You can relate this as a content in HTML element contains another HTML element. Now let's see how CSS looks like in action. Consider this line to be part of HTML responsible for that box thing in the UI. If we want to change the way that HTML element is rendered in the web page, we can apply some properties to the element using its class or ID or tags in CSS. Dot outer box collects all the elements having a class attribute value as outer box. Assume only one HTML element has that class name, and that is this element. We are adding a CSS attribute named transform with a value of rotate 90 degrees, which rotates the HTML element by 90 degrees. But rotate often messes up with the alignment, so we need to add another attribute to align using transform origin bottom left, which aligns the rotated HTML to bottom left. As said earlier, you can access HTML elements using the tag names and the IDs as well. So instead of dot outer box, using hashtag box1, which is its ID, or simply box, which is its tag name, will do the same thing. Now we are going to use this ability to rotate the YouTube web page. In the example shown, we had control over the class name and ID and all the other things. But in web pages, they are already present. So we need to find a suitable class or ID to apply the CSS changes on. We will make use of a couple of extensions in Safari to make that happen. One is to help us identify what class or ID or HTML tag name we use to apply CSS on, and other is to actually apply CSS to YouTube website. The links to those apps are given in the pinned comment and are free to download as of making this video. Once installed, you have to enable those extensions by going into Settings, Safari, Extensions. When you click on any of the extension, it says that the extension can read sensitive data and all, which it can if it wants to. But the developer has a say on it in its app's description. But still I understand if it concerns you, so I'd suggest to log out of YouTube, which by the way will log you out of Google account on entire Safari. If you want to log back into the Google account in Safari, you can turn off the extensions in settings for Safari and then log back in. By signing out, there is no sensitive information related to your account that is read. I have logged out of my Google account on Safari. I will now allow both of these extensions in settings. These extensions still won't be able to work as you need to go to a specific page, in this case YouTube, and enable them. Make sure to select always allow on this website and not every website. This ensures that these extensions can't read data for any other website other than for which you enable. Do the same thing for the other extension as well. You can always monitor which websites an extension has access to in settings. Now let's get back to see how to find the class or ID which we will use to rotate. Open up the Web Inspector extension, which is the I symbol at the top. You will see something like this. This is the HTML code of this YouTube page. Before we look at the YouTube's HTML, which can be overwhelming for someone who is looking at it for the first time, let me show you a smaller HTML. This has the UI on the left and its corresponding DOM inspector on the right. You can think this DOM inspector to basically be a type of interface to look at or inspect HTML. We can expand and collapse HTML elements like so. We can look at the corresponding UI highlighted when a DOM element is selected, etc. Basically, DOM inspector provides an easier way to navigate through the HTML code. Now, we want to find a HTML element that encompasses the whole body of the page so that we can rotate. What I am currently doing is on a laptop browser, but we will do similar things in iPad as well. First, look for something in the UI which will be part of the body that you want to rotate. Let me just select the fourth small video. It's an image, but assume it's a video. By default, the DOM inspector is not open. To open it, right click on the element and select inspect. Now we need to find a DOM element that suits for rotation. Let's just say that we go with this center image class. If we try to rotate it, only those elements with the class center image will rotate. In this case, all the images are having that class. Avoid using class name or HTML tag name which are used by multiple HTML elements for rotation. Also, for our case, it's better to rotate the whole page than to rotate something more specific. Let's see how you can navigate through DOM to find what you want. DOM Inspector has these small arrows indicating the hierarchy of elements. For example, all the suggestion video box pieces are in the same level and right column is the parent of all of them. Similarly, outer box is parent of both left column and right column. All we need to do to find a suitable HTML element to rotate is follow the parents at each step. For example, if you go back to selecting this video, I can trace back the hierarchy of parents and look at the corresponding DOM's UI, and I can find a parent element which has everything in this box. In this case, it's the element with the class outer box. If I rotate this box, it rotates everything inside and it fits our purpose. Now that we have a little understanding of navigating through DOM, let's try to do it for YouTube in the same laptop. We will do the same thing in iPad as well, but it's slightly different in iPad. Now here in YouTube, I'll select some empty space like here. You can choose anywhere you want, but I'll go with here for now. Right click and then inspect. Its corresponding DOM element will be opened on the right. As said before, we will simply trace back the hierarchy till we find a good match to rotate. We are still only covering the title section, so we move on parent by parent. This won't work as well. I'll just keep going. This will only rotate the left column, which is not ideal, so I'll just go on, and this will work. We can get hold of this element to rotate in a few ways as explained previously during that Angry Birds animation. Last thing, if you want to find appropriate class or ID or tag name in a laptop or desktop, you can use any browser in any operating system, as HTML would most likely be same anywhere. Now, let me just show you how to navigate the same thing in iPad. Once you open YouTube in Safari app on iPad, click on the eye icon near the search bar. This DOM is the same as you saw in the laptop, but the way we use is slightly different. In laptop, we just right clicked on an element and went to inspect. Here, it's done by clicking on this cursor with the box icon first and then clicking somewhere on the page. Once I click on that UI element, its corresponding DOM element shows up. Now it's the same thing as we go up the hierarchy, but since we don't have much space here and we can't really see which UI element is selected, we will have to click on the eye icon at the top and open and close this DOM inspector every time you want a better view of the UI to see which element is selected and which is not. Apart from that, it's pretty much identical to what we did in laptop. Now that we have found out which HTML element we want to rotate, in this case the one which has the ID as columns, let's inject some CSS to the class using the other extension by clicking on CSS at the top. We will add the same transform and transform origin attributes as used earlier to rotate. For the changes to take effect, just click somewhere outside. Now if we go out of the CSS editor, we see that the things are well gone. If you remember the Angry Birds animation, we actually pushed it to the bottom left. If we scroll down all the way to the bottom, we will find it there. But before that, let me just try to zoom out. But if I try to do that, it just shows the other tabs. To be able to zoom out a bit more, go to settings, Safari, page zoom and set it to 50%. Go back to Safari and refresh. Now you can zoom out a lot more. If you scroll down, you will see the rotated contents for a while and it disappears. To see it again, you will need to scroll down again and so on and so forth. It's because in the proper YouTube webpage, you can scroll down pretty much indefinitely through the comment section. As we scroll down, the bottom of the webpage keeps going further bottom, and since we set the transform origin to be bottom left, our rotated page will just keep going down. To make it stay in place, just go back to CSS editor and set a fixed height and width. For example, I'll go with 900 and 1000 pixels. It's taking shape, but if you accidentally scroll down, it just scrolls away. It's an easy fix, just add position to be absolute in CSS and fixes the element's position. It's probably fine now, but I'll add a few more changes for better usability. First thing, I'll just add some padding all around just to not let it stick to the bottom of the page. We can do that by adding some padding. All these values you can adjust to your preferences and screen size. I'll also change the background color as it will be much easier to identify while zooming in and zooming out. This looks nice, light enough to be helping with zooming in and out and dark enough to be ignored while watching the video. I'm not sure if you can see that color, but anyway, we definitely don't want to go that far down to see it every time. To pull it up, set up attribute called top. Make it negative. The more negative it is, the more it gets pulled up. But don't overdo it, it will make the page go out of visibility. Minus 1800 feels good for me. It will most likely change with other display sizes and pixel densities. Just play around to find the right one for you. Now, if you look at it close enough, you are not able to load the comment section. It's because we have limited the width to be a fixed number. To fix that, we can set the overflow attribute to be auto. Overflow value when set to auto can add a scroll bar if there is additional data which overflows the fixed width or height specified. Now we have our comment section back. We are almost done, but the video player is quite unusable. If you try to do anything like playing on pausing, it's a mess. There's a neat little trick out. The YouTube video turns out is kind of attached to the corner, so if I increase the width to let's say 2000 pixels, it gets neatly detached to the player controls and it's much more usable this way. Note that even though the UI is rotated, touch controls are not. So if you use the sliders, you have to move it right but not down. Same thing with skipping forward and backward. It considers only left and right but not up and down. But there's a nice trick here that makes using this much more user friendly. Just drag down the control center and you can have access to play, pause and forward backward controls. It's almost perfect except for one thing. If you try to use the captions, you see that it's actually near the controls and you won't be able to see them if you have it zoomed in. The way around this is to fine tune your width property. I'll try out a few values. 1800 is too far. 1500 covers the captions and 1600 looks fine. Now it's done. That's all I have on setting and fine tuning the CSS attribute. I can use zooming in and out to set the player to be of whatever size I want. A couple of quick notes. If you set the zoom back to usual 115%, values will need a change as shown, particularly height and width as the page is zoomed in. Also, as said, you can use the other tag names, IDs and class names including the parents as they would encompass the thing which you want to rotate. You can replace hashtag columns by any of the other things I am mentioning and they would do similar things, but don't use classes or tags which are used by multiple elements. Okay, that was a lot to digest, especially if you are new to this kind of stuff. I give a quick summary of what you need to do in order to get YouTube in your iPad to rotate. Sign out of YouTube in Safari, install the two apps pinned in comments, enable those extensions in settings, Safari extensions. In Safari app, allow these extensions to access YouTube. Since we already know which class name we will use, you don't have a need to find it. Simply copy the CSS. I put that in the comment section and paste it in the CSS extension. It will rotate the web page. Put Goodnotes on the left and Safari on the right in multitasking. Rotate the page clockwise as shown. You can reverse this by rotating anti-clockwise after writing. But while keeping the page rotated, turn on the auto rotate lock when in landscape mode and you are done. A quick tip, as navigating through the rotated UI might not be that user friendly, use the YouTube app to find any video and then copy the link in the share icon and paste it. Also, don't forget you can fine tune the CSS attribute values if necessary. Okay, if it was just those 7 simple steps, why was I talking about HTML, CSS, attributes, tags and whatnot? There are a few reasons for that. First, things can change at any time. At this point, using the column ID works, but if YouTube decides to change it, I don't want you to get stranded. If you followed what I explained, it's not that hard to find some other way out, and it's really not that hard to change the class names, IDs and tag names by YouTube. Second, there is no reason why this works only on YouTube. You can change any web page with this. I just tried with Khan Academy completely on my iPad and it took a couple of minutes. I'm not going to get into the details on how it's done. It's pretty much the same as with YouTube. I'll attach the CSS for the same in the comments. Third, as seen earlier, page zoom affects the CSS attribute values that we need to set in order to be able to use the rotated web page properly. The same things will be true if you want to use it with other iPads with different pixel densities or different sizes. It is because we are setting values in pixels and they are not the same for every device. So I want you to be able to fine tune the values as per your requirement. For that, you need to know what each thing is actually doing. And that's pretty much it for this video. I'd like to see some comments from you. If you have tried it for some other website or other iPad model, it will definitely help others and comments will help this video reach more people as well. If you find this video helpful and worth a like, then do hit a like or dislike if you didn't. Thanks for watching and bye.